I guess I might say, to some, what are you waiting for? And, what are you expecting from this life here? And, what does your heart desire? What passions do you have that you'd want to fulfill? When you're young, when you're 20, it's really easy to take risks and fail and recover from those risks. It's not so easy when you're 50 or 60 or 70. People don't want to move that readily. They're not as flexible. They get a little bit stuck in their ways, in their home. They get burdened maybe with mortgages or raising kids or putting them through school. So it's not so easy. Now is a great time, if you're 20, to go out and really blaze your path. Now, you don't have to go across the country. You could get involved. For instance, I have a client at 25 who had been working in his family's business because he'd been bouncing around the community and not doing such productive things. And he realized that he wanted to make a productive life, and he got involved in his family's business. And he took a real interest. In the first few years, he kind of was screwed off a little bit, and he showed up to work a little drunk on Mondays but then he took a real liking and a passion to wanting to grow that business. And that really forced him to step out of his comfort zone. And so that's really what we're talking about, is getting out of your comfort zone. It's so much easier to do it when you're younger, because again, you can fail and you can pick yourself up more easily and get into something else. But when you're older, it's much harder for people to get out of their comfort zones. So do it while you're young.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast, where we talk all things leadership and personal growth and showing up the best you possibly can on this great playing field we call life, so that when you get to the end of your life, you can look back and say you gave it everything you got. I've got an amazing guest today. His name is Jonathan Goldhill, and he's coming to us from the beautiful city of Los Angeles, California. Some things that I know about Jonathan is he is a masterful business coach and personal strategist who specializes in guiding next generation leaders of family businesses so that they can scale up their business as they take control over the leadership and ownership of the family business. Jonathan left New York for California at age 20 after his family's large privately held men's apparel manufacturing company that was started by his great-grandfather sold to a conglomerate in its third generation of family ownership. Within 10 years, Jonathan had established himself as the go-to expert for entrepreneurs looking to find their freedom. Today, Jonathan brings 30 years of experience advising, coaching, consulting, training, and guiding entrepreneurial and family businesses to grow their revenues, profits, and people's leadership. And my first question is always around, what can you tell us about getting the call to leadership and making a big decision about your life? Like what you did. You, at age 20, left New York for California. What would you share with listeners today who might be thinking about making a move like that? Even if they're not 20, they might be older.
This spark, and it ignites a hunger to do something bigger. Now, I wasn't exactly creating followership, which is what true leadership is all about, but I think it was about finding my own path first. So I hope that's a good answer to your question.
It is. It gave me chills thinking about that, what you witnessed as a boy, and also how it shaped you at 20 years old, deciding I'm leaving New York for California. That kind of a move across the country, 3,000 miles away. Could you talk more about what made you want to leave New York, where you had been born and raised, and start your life in a completely different state on a completely different coast?
Yeah, I think I was following a little bit in the footsteps of my older brother, who was kind of a father figure for me as growing up. I mean, I looked up to him a lot. He was someone that I look at my career as a sort of a number two man in most of the companies that I've been in. And I think that originated from my older brother. I would sit outside his door as a child waiting for him to maybe want something when he wasn't feeling well. And I would bring it to him. And when I got involved in a newspaper route business, it was someone else's newspaper route, but I was doing the fill-in work and I was helping him when he couldn't solve that. So I think my move to California was seeing how my older brother had stepped out and moved away from the family. He went to Denmark and then he went to the Caribbean. And I thought, I need to strike out and find my place. And I knew it wasn't going to be going to school in Europe because I didn't really speak any other language besides English. And London and England didn't seem too attractive in terms of weather. So I went west. And I went to California, which is a natural progression for New Yorkers to go to. And I chose probably one of the most beautiful places to go to school in the country, which is Santa Barbara. And once I got to Santa Barbara, I just said, wow, I mean, I'm not going back to New England where the snow was probably 10 or 15 feet high that the winter of 78. And I stayed, and it became California is like not just a state, but a state of mind, I thought. And I adapted to that state of mind. It was really life-changing. And it was a really big move as a 20-year-old. It was courageous.
Well, I got to ask because, we're living in a really different time right now. I mean, people talk about it a lot. We read about it a lot because it's so much a part of our lives. For people who are listening who are, 20 or even 30 or still have quite a bit of life in front of them, what kind of advice would you give to the younger folks who might be more timid or more afraid about taking a risk like leaving what's familiar and finding a new place, based on the experience that you had? Because it's not like, when you were 20, the world was this Shangri-La, that there were no problems, that we weren't dealing with foreign issues or wars or, whatever. What would you tell someone who's younger, who hasn't really fled the nest, so to speak?
I guess I might say to some, what are you waiting for? And, what are you expecting from this life here? And, what does your heart desire? What passions do you have that you'd want to fulfill? When you're young, when you're 20, it's really easy to take risks and fail and recover from those risks. It's not so easy when you're 50 or 60 or 70. People don't want to move that readily. They're not as flexible. They get a little bit stuck in their ways, in their home. They get burdened maybe with mortgages or raising kids or putting them through school. So it's not so easy. Now is a great time, if you're 20, to go out and really blaze your path. Now, you don't have to go across the country. You could get involved. For instance, I have a client at 25 who had been working in his family's business because he had been bouncing around the community and not doing such productive things. And he realized that he wanted to make a productive life. And he got involved in his family's business. And he took a real interest. In the first few years, he kind of was screwed off a little bit. And, he showed up to work a little drunk on Mondays or, Fridays. But then he took a real liking and a passion to wanting to grow that business. And that really forced him to step out of his comfort zone. And so that's really what we're talking about, is getting out of your comfort zone. It's so much easier to do it when you're younger because, again, you can fail and you can pick yourself up more easily and get into something else. But when you're older, it's much harder for people to get out of their comfort zones. So do it while you're young.
I love that. And speaking of family-owned businesses, this is your area of expertise. You have worked with numerous family-owned businesses. You see the ins and outs, the pluses, the minuses of that model. Could you talk more in detail about specifically the handing over the reins of leadership from one generation to the next? What do you see as the biggest challenge in that? And what do you see as the greatest reward?
So I think the biggest challenge is the mindsets of the individuals who are involved in the transition. So let's just say it's a mother and father, or it's a father who own the business. What is their mindset with regard to the next generation, the rising generation, becoming leaders in that organization? Do they relish the opportunity for them to be able to enjoy the spoils of what they've created and appreciate what the next generation can bring to that business? Or are they fearful that their child or children will mess it up? They'll bet the farm and they'll blow it. So the rewards are that it can be an amazing journey for both the parent and the child or children, that this can really take their lives, both of them, to a whole new level. But of course, the consequences of it not being done well or being done right is that things could really fall apart. And so there's a tremendous amount of understanding, communication. There's got to be transparency. I think that oftentimes the next generation leader will need someone who can mentor and guide them, because the person who got them to where they are, their parent, isn't going to get them to where they want to get to. Otherwise, the parent would have done it themselves. So it's a challenging opportunity that some people will shrink from and other people will rise into. And it's so important. I like to coach those rising generation, that rising leader that really thinks that the business can be multiplied to tenfold, and will do it with great awareness, great consciousness, with care to make sure that he or she doesn't mess it up.
Okay. What kind of calls do you get more of? People looking for that, what you just described? I want to grow this business. I'm really passionate about what my father, my parents, my grandfather has created, or people who are at that breaking point where they're like, we're going to lose it all. What would you say statistically you see more of?
80% of the calls are from the former people. They want to grow the business. They just lack a roadmap. They don't really have maybe a clear vision. They don't know how to shorten the road or to their goal. They don't know if they have the right people in place. They don't know also if their mom or dad is really ready to turn over this leadership to them. Or maybe they've turned over the leadership to them, but they haven't gotten ownership of the business. And that's something that they want to come along with the growing of the business. They want to be rewarded for the work they're doing.
I like that it's 80% of wanting to grow it versus, please help us not destroy each other. So totally different kinds of situations. So when they do call you in, Jonathan, can you take us inside a typical kind of, what do you do? Like, what's the role that you play in facilitating this growth?
So I really am that mentor, that guide. I help them implement a playbook or an operating system or a set of best practices, whatever you want to call it. And these are proven practices that will help scale any business. And so they don't have those tools. They're not familiar with them. And if they are, they don't really know how to do it. They want someone who can hold their hand, hold them accountable, take a stand for getting them to that next level. So what I do is I basically introduce them to books for them to read that will align well with the learning that they need to do at that moment. I will help show them what this roadmap will look like at the end of this journey, or 3 or 5 years into it. And then we will start walking that route to that journey. And it looks like, from a practical standpoint, it looks like a combination of business therapy, where you show up maybe once or twice a week, or once or twice a month, maybe more frequently, to kind of go through some goal setting and accountability and focusing and troubleshooting and talking about things that are, that where you're stuck. And then it'll be meetings with the team, where the team is literally working together to plan out and map out, what does the future look like for this business? Where do we see ourselves in 3 months, in 12 months, in 3 years? What are the goals that we want to set to get there? And do we have the right people in the right seats? And are they doing the right things so that we can achieve those goals? So that's kind of what it looks like.
Okay. What's one thing you wish you would like listeners to know about family-owned businesses that the average person would not have any idea about? Because it's a special kind of a business. It's just different when you have multiple generations involved.
So there's a tremendous loyalty in family businesses that is unique to family business. And the result is that sometimes there are relationships, there are negative communication styles, there are things that are dysfunctional that you would only see in maybe in any family that don't seem maybe appropriate in a business organization. And so if you're going to be successful in a family business, whether you're family or not, you need to understand how to navigate through these dynamics and understand that if you're in the family, that certain conversations belong in the family and certain conversations belong in the leadership room and certain conversations belong with the managers. And there should not be a bleeding over of these different conversations, like family conversations that should be had around the family office or dining room table, or maybe they're even with the owners of the company. Those are different conversations, and you need to be able to separate and sort those. And if there are negative communication styles, there's always, I find, a challenge with family businesses where, some people will come to me who are not part of the family and say something like, I either laugh or I have to remove myself when they get into that kind of a dynamic with each other, like it's weird or it's not appropriate or something like that. And so family members need to understand that they need to work through negative or difficult conversation or communication styles, and they need to do that privately, not publicly.
Okay, that raises a question for me. I'm curious. We live in a world, a social media world, where it's, people can air anything and everything all the time. What's your approach because the name of your book is Disruptive Successor. So the word disruptive, things have been disrupted the way business gets done, certainly for everybody. But given what you just shared about family dynamics and communication patterns and so forth, what is your approach and advice to using these tools that are now in our pockets, on our phones, in terms of preserving the integrity of the family's privacy and keeping those conversations separated?
Yeah, I think social media is a sort of a dangerous area for some people. I was introduced to the term flexing, which I understand is when you're basically sort of showing off on social media. I think that's a really inappropriate use of social media. I think that social media really needs to be like stuff that you want to share with the public that can be somewhat marketing driven or promotional around family businesses. And you can celebrate your successes and your awards, but don't make it too personal. I think that's really important. Yeah, social media has become this sort of interesting medium for anyone can become a micro broadcaster. And you have to be really careful. Don't you agree, Mary Lou?
I agree 100%. And within the leadership equation, when we think about leading a business, family owned or not, there's a certain element of decorum, of boundaries, there's certain things that we just are not going to broadcast because A, it's really none of anybody's business, and B, it could come back and become a PR nightmare for us, because things get taken out of context all the time. People, grab snippets here and there and create these mashups. And I'd never heard that word flexing, but it makes sense to me, the way you described it. And, at the end of the day, I would imagine the businesses, the leaders that call you in to work with them are, because they're focused on growth and expansion, they want to do it in a way that, is in integrity, that's aligned, but they just don't know how. You mentioned a playbook, and I know that's something that you're big on working with people on. Could you talk more about the playbook concept and why that's so important?
Yeah, sure. I just want to harp on what you're saying. It's really important for leaders to be exemplary in their behavior because they're really being looked at very carefully. And if they're not leading by example, then what are they doing? Leaders have to walk their walk, talk their talk, and super important. All right, let's get into the playbook. So I think that a playbook is basically sort of an operating system for how you run the business. It might start with a set of values, which I maybe prefer to call operating behaviors, but core values are an important part of any playbook. An operating system of a business, it defines the behaviors that people will operate by. Just like the military have a code of conduct, I believe that businesses should have a code of behavior. So that's one of the pieces of my playbook. And purpose is another part of it. What is the business all about? Why are you in business? It's not just to make money. It's not just to get rich, or it's not just to find financial freedom, but it's something that's going to lift all the people up in the company. And I think it's really important to articulate what that is. People who, if you want to create followership, you have to have a purpose that people can get behind and get excited about. And so that's super important. And that's one of the elements of my playbook. Now, there are other elements. Planning is an element. I think you have to have a plan. You need to know where you're going, and the team needs to be aligned behind that plan. They need to share in that vision. They need to be excited about it. It needs to be smart, which means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound. And then there are other elements of the playbook, which is like, what are the standard processes that we use to run the business, to manage the business, to drive business or opportunities into the business, to, record keeping. So there's lots of processes and they cover every function of the business. And so these are elements to drive towards profitability. I think also you have to have a playbook around your people. Your hiring processes have to have standard protocols for how you recruit, how you onboard, how you train, how you reward. So these are the elements that I think are commonly go into what are known as operating systems or best practices that coaches like myself implement and install into companies.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
Is there, of those things you just listed, the different elements of the playbook, is there one that you consistently see is missing every single time? Like you can walk in and just say, yep, they're not going to have this in place versus another.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes they don't have too many of these in place. So I probably could pick on any one.
Fair enough.
But I will quote one of my colleagues who is a coach who went into a company, and I realized it was true. He said, all right, the first year, we're going to focus on your people because chances are you don't have the right people. They're not in the right seats. They're not doing the right things. But there's going to be some kind of dysfunction in your team. So while I have a set of best practices, a checklist that we'll work from, the first thing is to make sure that the team, both the executive team, the leadership team, the management team, that they're aligned and that they're healthy. They have, following from Pat Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team model, that they have a high level of trust, a high level of collaboration, that they engage in conflict in a constructive manner, that they are results driven, they're accountable to the results, and that they're committed to them. And so I find that the first year, I focus on, do we have the right people? And if not, who are these people that we need to bring on board?
Okay, yeah, people. It always comes down to people. People,
doesn't it?
It really does. And, you were talking earlier about, you described a situation where somebody who works for a company, for example, but is not a family member. Okay, so it's interesting that a family owned and operated business does not mean that everybody that works there is in the family. And they have to hire outside help. To me, that brings in a whole host of both amazing opportunities, but also things that can go really, really wrong. But I think because you spend the time helping them create this playbook where you have your code. This is what we value here. This is what our culture is about. People like us do things like this. And if you're on board with it, great. You're going to be awesome here. If this doesn't align with you, then we're not a good fit, right?
Yeah. Don't even bring them on board in the first place.
Right. And so do you see situations where you have to coach them through letting people go?
Absolutely. That's an important part. And I think that there are really good ways of doing it and not such good ways of doing it. And I kind of try to coach my clients to, again, lead by example because, other people will observe how a person was terminated. And if they thought it was unfair, they'll be watching their back to make sure that they're not next. So super important that they take care of their people and lead by really good behaviors in terms of, letting people go. And one way to do it oftentimes is by looking at the core value fit. Do they fit with the behaviors that we're trying to create in this company? Because if we're going to build a really strong company, it's going to be based on having a great culture. And a great culture is going to be great based on having great people. And great people is going to be based on people who share a common set of ideas or values around what they're doing and a common purpose. So super important to take care of your people and make sure you have the right people on your bus or in your boat, however you want the metaphor goes.
Yeah, whatever metaphor you...
on the field.
Down on that playing field. Those of us who are sports fans have certainly witnessed bad behavior by elite players who lose their cool or at some level, their value system is not aligned with where they are. They may have some personal conflicts with management or, their coach or even their teammates. And, these are all very real situations. I'm curious about the hiring, finding the right people to fill the seats, or as Jim Collins writes, about putting the right people on the bus, do you have them in the right seats? Who's driving the bus? All that kind of stuff. The advertisements for some of these platforms that help companies find talent, a lot of their marketing is around the idea that, people come and go. We all know that for various reasons, but that it's hard to find good talent. How accurate is that, Jonathan? What are you seeing? Is it hard? Is it hard to find good people?
Yeah, it's really hard to find good people. And especially today, where we're living in a time of this so-called great resignation, where a lot of people are checking out and realizing that maybe they don't need to live in this maybe city and they're moving out to the country, or they can do things on Zoom. I mean, we have a pretty full employment economy right now, so it's been even more difficult for people to find talent. It's the most consistent complaint I hear from people who I work with or who come to talk to me about working with me is, where do I find this talent? And, I think that you have to be really creative. And I think that one of the things that you need to do, and this isn't something that happens overnight, is you have to create a company that makes you like a destination employer. You have to be so attractive to candidates that people want to come work for you and will move to where you are to come work for you. And the problem is I have clients who fit that prototype and others who don't. Others who might be in a great geographic area, but their company is just not run that well. And so the excitement around coming to that company is not great. And so you have to kind of fix your insides to make sure that you're really an attractive company. And that's a long game plan. But the short game plan is to use some of the tools that are available from some of the best recruitment systems like top grading and the WHO methodology for hiring that will help you to make sure that you're choosing the right people. And that means that, you're not only choosing people who can be very productive in their roles, but also fit the core values. And you've got to be very creative about how do you interview for people to fit the core values. And that's where I find that I'm coaching my clients on how do you figure out whether or not they're a core value fit.
Wow. That's so important because it's tied directly to the growth, which is the big goal, right? Because the people that you bring on board, they're going to be instrumental in achieving those goals. And so taking the time to work with you, really get clear on where have we been, where are we now, where do we want to go, and what are the pieces that we've perhaps not invested a ton of time or any time into developing. And I imagine you get so much of a reward from seeing the light bulbs go on when people go, oh, wow, now we get it. That's one of the greatest rewards of being in a coaching role. And I'm curious, who has been a coach for you, Jonathan? Who has helped you to become as exceptional as you are at what you do?
So I've been through quite a few coaches. I think I hired my first coach when I went out on my own, and that was in 2000. Then I've consistently had coaches for the most part through 2020, and maybe even 2022, I'll have a new coach. So the coaches that have had the biggest impact on me were coaches who gave me a tool set, the use of which changed my way of thinking and gave me what I felt was an advantage in the marketplace with my clients. It gave me somewhat of I wouldn't call it a curriculum because it doesn't follow a set path, but it gave me tools that I can give to my clients, the use of which changed their behaviors and their way of thinking. And so there were two coaches that come to mind that did that really well. And that really helped me to grow my business.
And because the tools that they gave you were so instrumental, here you are, you've created tools and frameworks that you pass on to the clients you work with. I love that, kind of in your own way, you passing it on. And I think that's, for anybody listening who is considering working with a coach, maybe it's been a while or they've never hired one or the one they're working with now is coming to an end. What is the toolbox that the coach brings to the table? I think that's a great question when you're considering a coach is, what are you going to offer me to help guide me through this process I'm about to embark on? So love that.
I think it's super important. I mean, you want to make sure that you're choosing someone who you feel like you have good chemistry with, of course, right? And you want to make sure that they have the tools that you're going to need in your business. And then you want them to be a leader. So are they a good listener? Do they share information? Are they encouraging? Are they growth oriented as well? These are all things that I think you would look for from a coach or professional advisor.
Definitely. Well, we're at the part of the show I call touchdown, Jonathan, which means I'm putting you in the red zone with less than 30 seconds left on the clock. You are down by 4 points, which means it's now or never. Would you tell us about a time when you metaphorically ran or threw that ball into the end zone for the game-winning touchdown?
Oh, wow. What a challenging question. I can't get Patrick Mahomes out of my head. I mean, if I could just watch that all over again, that was an amazing game that he played, not this last week, but the week before.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So you're asking me when I was in the red zone. So I was growing a consulting firm and we were 7 people and the earthquake struck in California, 1994, Northridge. And suddenly our firm, which was a nonprofit economic development firm serving small businesses with loans, entrepreneurial training, business counseling and consulting, suddenly we were asked to be able to serve the entire San Fernando Valley, which is a population of 1 million people, 640,000 employees, I think, working for some 60,000 companies or something astronomical. And we suddenly had to take this business from what was a very small business consulting firm and add 20 people. Literally, we were given $1 million overnight to serve small businesses that were impacted by the Northridge earthquake. And we blew that business up really fast. And we held, I think, over 30 workshops in the next 6 weeks for small businesses, reaching out to all the chambers of commerce. There were 22 of them, and holding workshops on how to complete their FEMA loan requests and their SBA requests. And that basically took that business, and that business never looked the same, our business. We took it from a 7-employee company to a 30-employee company in a matter of a few months, and scaled that business to where it became the state's largest economic development organization, serving the most businesses, doing the most loans of any small business development center. I think that was like an amazing transformation. And that's what comes to mind, being in the red zone in that situation.
That's a great story. And it also illustrates that sometimes our greatest achievements happen during crisis. You know, when you really literally are up against the clock or your back is against the wall. I just recently finished reading the book Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And in that, he talks about how humans do better when we're under pressure than when life is really easy and we're just kind of going along. And I found that really fascinating. And your story, goes to show you guys were able to rise to the occasion. You didn't crumble. You didn't back away from the challenge. You said, we can do this. And you went on and did it. It's incredible. Well, listen, for people who'd like to know more about you and your business, your book, where do you hang out online, Jonathan? Where can they find you?
So I hang out on LinkedIn, and I do have a team of people that do my social media, but I do respond to all inquiries, requests. I'm pretty responsive there. On LinkedIn, I have a personal profile. I have a profile for my book, which is Disruptive Successor, and a profile for my company, the Goldhill Group. And my LinkedIn profile can lead you to my business coaching website if you want more information there, or my book website. So that's a great place to find me.
That's awesome. So team, you know that the links to connect with Jonathan will be on his show notes page at pyppodcast.com, along with other details about him. And this has been great, Jonathan. You've taken us inside the world of family-run businesses and also just general advice about developing a playbook and knowing what your values are. And for people who don't want to be business owners, if they're looking for work, what can they do to show up and be the talent that a company would say, absolutely, we want you on our team? And before we say goodbye, could you leave us with a book recommendation, one that has influenced you and your leadership journey over the years?
Yeah, so I think one of my favorite books around leadership was Jack Welch's autobiography. It was called Jack, Straight from the Gut. It really portrays a person, just like I told my story and started out as, where I was at 16. I find it really interesting to read the autobiographies of leaders and, where they came from and what they were made of. And so that book not only talks about his childhood and his failed marriages, but it talks about the philosophies and the leadership things that he did when presiding over General Electric during, probably one of the greatest corporations in America's greatest shareholder returns over at least a decade. So many leadership lessons, so many tools that we coaches use today came from Jack Welch's leadership thinking. So highly recommend that book. It's a great read.
All right. Well, I'll put a link to that book on your show notes page as well, because listen, leaders are readers. You don't have to read a gazillion books, but the ones you do read, absorb them, study them, do what you did, pull the lessons and, return to it every now and then, and you'll see something new. It's great. No one's ever recommended that book before, so thank you for that. And thank you for being a great guest today, Jonathan. I've enjoyed my time with you, and I wish you all the best as you continue going out there and serving the family-owned businesses of the world, as well as entrepreneurs who are looking to grow.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.